Good afternoon and welcome to our first talk of the day for the Res Luncheon. My name is Lillian Sparks Robinson. I'm a member of the Rosebud Sioux Tribe. I serve as Vice Chair for the Board of Directors for the National Center for American Indian Enterprise Development, and we're so pleased to have you all here with us. And I'm thrilled to have my good friend, Sarah Eaglehart, joining the stage with me today. So Sarah, you are an author, a two-time Emmy Award winner, a 40 under 40 honoree in past years, a committed economic development transformational leader, and somebody who's just an overall baddie. And my question for you is, how did you get to where you are today, and what continues to motivate you?
Thank you, Lillian. I'm just really excited to be here today. It was 2014 when I got 40 under 40 here, so it's been about a decade. So it just really feels like a marker for me professionally to make it to the big stage here at Res. So I'm just really excited to be here. What motivates me? I was thinking about that question this morning, and I was thinking about how I got here today, because I get that question a lot. And I often think about the fact that, I grew up on Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. I had a lot of the struggles and challenges that young people have, growing up in reservation communities with a mother with a head trauma, no father figure in my life, raised by grandma and aunties and uncles. And I used to, I lived in a border town community on Pine Ridge Reservation, so my tribal community was a mile outside of Martin, South Dakota, which was a primarily white farming town at that time. And so I really grew up in this space of sort of constant racial tension as a young person. And then I was also just a dreamer, and so the people that were really inspiring me were like my auntie, who was a teacher. She was a teacher for 30 years at American Horse School on the reservation. And then my grandma, and I think that coupled with going to a mostly white high school where I was constantly, the information that I was being given was a lot of times you're not smart enough. You can't apply to InMed because you're never going to get in. I got in. You can't apply to Native Americans in journalism or whatever, which I also got in, and I went to that too. So I'm getting that from my white high school counselors telling me that I'm not good enough, but at the same time, I have an auntie and grandma who I know, they were always saying, yes, you can. Yes, you can do it, and a lot of times, even when they didn't necessarily understand, I protested in my high school at age 16 for a warrior homecoming mascot, and it was 5 warrior princesses, a big chief, and a medicine man, and the medicine man would dance around the women and choose one to give to the big chief. And like I said, this was a mostly white farming town, so they had done this for 57 years. And so at 16, me and my identical twin sister decided to protest. And my grandma and my aunties, they were like, okay, we don't know what you're doing, but we support you. and we didn't know how to protest, right? Like we were like, oh, you make a sign. We were after, AIM. And so we knew you had to make a sign. And the sign said, simply respect Lakota culture is what the sign said. So for me, growing up in this community that had constant racial tension and where I was constantly having to fight for opportunities and believe in myself and be grounded in dreaming and intuition and spirituality, that's really what gets me here today.
Beautiful. I love it. I mean, the female relatives play such an important part of our lives, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But as I mentioned, and I'm going to continue to mention because I think it's just so incredibly awesome, you have 2 Emmys. So let's get into it. I want to hear about this Emmy experience and why and how you were awarded. But I also want to talk about the fact that historically, Native women are underrepresented and misrepresented in the film industry. And what concrete steps can we take to make sure that the film industry is uplifting indigenous voices and making sure that Native women are part of the storytelling and other opportunities that are available in the film industry?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, I really love Cherokee Film. I love that their initiatives around More Natives is, doing exactly that, training and taking advantage of tax incentives in Oklahoma. And I love what they're about and how they're doing all of the training from, the cast and crew to directors and writers. And so I think it takes that kind of skill set building. I think for myself, I won my first Emmy in 2019 it was for Outstanding Interactive Media. I won that with John Legend's company called Get Lifted. And what I loved about that project was it was an animation project, and I loved that culturally, when you're in that world, there are all of these animals. And all of these animals would, they're all worried about how the world is getting colder and, there's fires, and they wanted to talk about how the crow became black. Well, many indigenous cultures have stories about how the crow became black. So our version was a very generic version on purpose because we didn't want anybody mad at us. But we also wanted to support and help with healing. And so some of those storylines in there are the animals. So Constance Wu played the skunk. Ty Sheridan played the turtle. John Legend, of course, played the crow. And then Oprah played the one that created everything by thinking, so God, which was an ant, by the way. And then
we love Auntie Oprah, don't we? Yeah.
I did get to meet Auntie Oprah. And then, I also, Randy Edmonds was a narrator for that. He's Kiowa and Caddo. So that project, what I loved about it was you're immersed in this world with the goggles on, it's on Oculus, and you're dancing and singing with the animals. And as Lakota people, we're raised to, believe that the animals are our relatives. And I can say I felt it was so healing. I was like, wow, like you get to actually dance and like sing with these animals in this world, which I thought was just so important because I think sometimes, we have so much struggle in our communities that having some joy and happiness is really important for us and our young people as well.
Yeah, now more than ever, absolutely. Joy and happiness is incredibly important to live healthy lives and have healthy communities. And I love how you always incorporate your Lakota upbringing and your Lakota values and traditions. And when you and I talk, often we talk about that, how that centers our lives and centers the work that we do. And how do we honor the legacy of the grandmothers, mothers, aunties, female relatives who have shaped us and influenced us, as well as make sure we're passing on those values to the next generation of women today? I mean, let's face it, we're in our big auntie energy phase and we have big Lakota energy, so combine the two, it's pretty powerful.
Yeah, I was sharing that just recently, I would say probably in the last 6 months, I've sort of entered this unapologetic auntie era where, I am looking back at, younger generations and, young leaders who want to be involved in business and, they want to take on these like big roles. And then at the same time, I'm also seeing sort of a lack of knowledge sometimes about values, Lakota values. And there was a teaching recently, and I also have all of these in my book that I co-wrote with my identical twin sister.
Name the book, plug the book.
It's called Warrior Princesses Strike Back, How Lakota Twins Fight Oppression and Heal Through Connectedness. I wrote it with my twin sister, the psychotherapist, and we wrote it as a personal development memoir about how we grew up in our reservation, because we wanted to talk about all of the beauty of our community, the hardships, that, what got us through the hardships, what we wish we would have known, and we wanted to share that. So we could only do it through telling our stories. And one of the lessons that we talk about is value versus law. So when I was talking to my Auntie Ethelene, Two Dogs, who's an academic and she's amazing, and when I was writing my book, I was telling her, we included values in our book, and she said, no, actually, they're laws. And when she said that to me, it was such an aha moment because when you grow up in a community and you're surrounded by a particular worldview, a lot of indigenous peoples, we're experiential teachers. So we're observing like this behavior and how to be respectful, humble, courage, wisdom. And so I'm watching and learning through my aunties and my grandmas. And so she said, no, they're laws because when you didn't follow these laws, there were consequences. And she said, so historically, when you think about things like domestic violence or violence against women or, MMIW or things like that never happened historically because if you didn't follow, things like respect and treating your sisters as relatives and things like that, you were banished from the tribe and were probably gonna die because, that's what would happen. And so I do this sort of unapologetic anti-era because, I have my book and I'm sharing and educating that way. I also have aunties that have taught me and handed down knowledge to me. So some of the big ones that I think about is, the late Marlene Helgamo, who was a great supporter and teacher and was so bossy to me, right? And she was the one that said, I worked at the Episcopal Church, we worked on the Doctrine of Discovery. We did the repudiation back in 2009. That was a lot of my job when I was on the staff of the presiding bishop. Before that, I was working in marketing and advertising at Viejas Casino, by the way. So I went from casino to church. Then I met Marlene. Then Marlene said, we're gonna work on boarding schools. She's like, that's what we're gonna do. She's like, I need you to go start working on this and fundraising for the National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition. And so that was work that we took on. And then of course, people like Shirley Murphy, who's also Lakota, and she's always passing down knowledge too. So I just think it's so important to have this incredible network. I think sometimes we don't talk about how important network is. Having the professionalism and grace and following these values, every tribe has them, these laws, through action, which I think is just so important. And then when we're going into business, to just always be grounded by that cultural system.
Absolutely. I miss Marlene. I value and treasure the relationships that we build coming to these conferences and meeting new mentors, meeting new emerging leaders, meeting new peers and new colleagues, and continuing those conversations throughout the year, and then coming back and then catching up and visiting and hearing what other folks are doing, but also learning from other community values as well. So we don't have a lot of time left. Tell us what's next. What's on the horizon? What are you working on? And what can we be expecting in the near future?
Well, there's just so much. I mean, I think that I want to give a shout out to two of the nonprofits that I currently work with. One is Return to the Heart Foundation, which I co-founded to fund Indigenous women-led initiatives. So just, that's a resource for anybody interested in looking for that type of support. And then we just co-founded the Indigenous Fashion Collective. Yeah, so we held our first Indigenous Met Gala last year, and we're getting ready to host the next one, which is gonna be October 11th in Los Angeles at the Autry again. So we're excited to share that news as well. And then, I also work with Twyla True from True Family Enterprises, and so that, I feel like I have my day job, and my day job is working with Twyla on tribal growth strategies. And so we're constantly looking to support tribes in economic development in many different areas. And it's so fun for me as somebody that loves to learn from somebody as successful as Twyla. And so I just sort of keep on taking that on too. And then in filmmaking, I'm working on a project right now which will be my directorial debut. And then I also have another project that's coming out with John Legend this spring in like a month or two. So I have those projects on the horizon. So there's just still a lot that I want to do, and for me, storytelling and social justice is at the core of everything, and if we can do it through economic development, for me that is key, and that's why it's so important to be here at RES.
Yeah, what a blessing to have work that you find both meaningful and that you're passionate about, and that speaks to your core, that uplifts your community, that allows you to express who you are as a Lakota woman, and that is supported by all of us here in this room. So as we wrap, my final question statement is, this past Saturday we celebrated International Women's Day, and I hope all of you took the opportunity to thank the women in your lives for being the blessings that they are, and for support, and I hope you continue to support them. Yes, round of applause for all the women here. So in honor of that, what parting advice do you have to the women that you might meet throughout this week, that are listening now, that you'll encounter over the next 3 days here at RES?
I really think that mentorship and relationship development and network is really key to anybody's success. I think oftentimes when you're young, we're looking for what you're supposed to do, right? And my pathway has been if you looked at it, you'd be like, what? You went from casino to church to filmmaking to fashion to economic development. And yes, I did.
All related.
Yeah.
All related.
They're all related because storytelling and advocacy is at the center of them. And so for me, I've always really wanted to see a change in my home community. I've really been driven by wanting to see a change in my lifetime. And so I look at my skill set and I think about, okay, what am I blessed? What's the skill set that I have? And then I pray. I pray a lot. I follow my intuition and my guidance. And so all of us as, Native people, we all have that intuition and that knowing from, Tinkashla, the creator. And we're all given the ability to listen, and you have to find time to listen and to follow that intuition. So for me, as a woman, I think your friendships and your network are so important. I think praying is really important. I think knowing your skill set and then having the courage to step forward and take advantage of those opportunities.
Absolutely. Wow. Incredible words. Sarah, I always treasure the time that we take to visit, to share, to trade information, to brainstorm, and to think of what the possibilities are for Indian country. And I thank you for sharing your background, some of your expertise, as well as your wisdom with us today. So thank you. And thank you all for taking the time to listen to us. Have a great rest of the lunch.